Welcome to part 3 of the overview of the history of the Wye Valley Railway. My name is Kev Daniels. I'm a volunteer for Wye Valley Greenway, which reopened part of the Wye Valley Railway as a walking and cycling route between Chepstow and Tintern in 2021. A full introduction is available at the video titled History of the Wye Valley Railway Introduction. Our opening slide shows Tyddingham Tunnel, which is described in part 2. The Navvies. Many of the navvies would have lived in encampments in temporary wooden cabins, as there would not have been adequate local accommodation. A local farmer told one of the volunteers that he believed that a navvy encampment existed close to the air shaft towards the northern end of the tunnel, which is quite likely. At Woodcroft, less than 2 miles from the tunnel, several new cottages were built to house the Irish navvies. And in this photograph here, we have a photograph of navvies and boys who are working at a shallow cutting in Buckinghamshire. The reason we're using this photograph is that we don't have contemporary photographs of navvies working at the Wye Valley Railway. However, these are illustrative. The rails that you can see are not permanent but temporary tracks laid by the contractor, and both horses and locomotives were used to pull the large number of what are called tipping wagons here, required to remove the enormous quantities of earth and stone between cuttings and embankments. Now, the way the tipping wagons worked was that basically it is an unbalanced wagon. However, it is held in place probably by a pin, and when it is ready to be unloaded, the pin would have been withdrawn and the wagon would have dropped its load in the location that you want the load to be dropped. The stone removed from the tunnel was probably used to make the embankment between Tyddingham Station and the main line, and there were up to 80 tip wagons employed on the line. A large number of horses would have been employed and stabled close to the work. A newspaper sale advertisement in July 1876 described some of them by name. Short-legged active cart horses, including Polly, bay mare, 6 years old, and harness horses, including Dick, bay gelding, 5 years old. Now, the notice for sale also included reference to a 6-wheeled saddle tank locomotive by Manning and Wardle, nearly new. Now, this locomotive was dispatched on the 23rd of November 1874 to Reed Brothers at Monmouth, who were the contractors building the line. It was a K-class locomotive, number 527, and we know that its name was Tintern. Now, this is a photograph of the same class of locomotive, so we can see precisely what the locomotive looked like. In this slide on the left is Christiana Morgan. She was a member of the temperance movement, and her husband was Thomas Morgan of Tyddingham House in Tyddingham. The behaviour of the navvies disgusted Christiana Morgan, and Sophia Morgan organised evangelical services with coffee at a building in Woodcroft known as the Old Coffee Room, probably this building on the right. This was largely to combat the drunkenness and disorderly behaviour among the navvies. Free coffee, cocoa and buns were served. They could attend Bible classes and learn to read, and spelling bees were enjoyed. Spelling bees were competitions where contestants are asked to spell a wide selection of words. Now, how can we be sure that Christiana Morgan's opinion of navvies was reasonable? Well, we have records made by Jeff Mead, who was a local historian who wrote an unpublished master's degree dissertation called Railway Influence Upon a Country Parish, Tidingham. And he records that in February 1875, a great many complaints had been made of the damage done to property by navvies going to and from their work during the night, and it was high time that a stop was put to it. The most typical offence was drunkenness, but the local magistrates constantly charged them for such activities as stealing from gardens, damaging fences, or taking away clothes. The magistrates could be very strict, as one navvy found when being fined the full penalty of £5 for keeping a dog without a licence. However, on the other side, here we have a picture of the Moravian church at Brockware, and the navvies were ferried across the Wye to the Moravian church on a Sunday. The Moravians were pacifists. There's a worldwide community today of around 1 million and a reasonable sized community in this country. At the church, they attended special gospel services. Those present were apparently most orderly and devout at the meetings. In France, the English navvies were paid twice the French because the French could not do anything like the same amount of work. And when a force of navvies was being assembled to build a railway in the Crimea to carry supplies to the siege of Sevastopol, the Illustrated London News remarked, "The men employed on our engineering works have long been known as the very elite of England as to physical power, broad, muscular, massive fellows who are scarcely matched in Europe." The navvies were close-knit. They worked exceptionally hard. They could be unruly, but could also be very well behaved. They were the king of labourers. We're now going to talk about the Wireworks branch. The Wireworks branch was a small branch line leaving the main Wye Valley Railway line, and this shows the approximate line of the Wireworks branch. This is a view from the Devil's Pulpit. So back here somewhere would have been where it would have left the main line. It would have then carried on down here, down a little slope, across the Wireworks bridge and finished about here, which was the location of the lower ironworks. Now, the Duke of Beaufort exacted a heavy price. And the reason is that the original route of the railway went through Tintern, and that would have served the Wireworks directly. The as-built line followed the Welsh-English side of the River Wye, bypassing the Wireworks. So he demanded that a branch line be built and a bridge be built across the River Wye to carry the line. And this is his onerous agreement. It says, for example, it was to be built at the Wye Valley Railway's own expense for the exclusive use of the Duke and tenants, therefore of no value to the local people wanting a station in Tintern itself. And the Wye Valley Railway shall forever maintain the branch line junction and bridge in a good and proper state of repair, and all wagons shall be provided by the Wye Valley Railway. And here we have the Wireworks Bridge. It is a Grade 2 listed building, and part of the listing states that it provides part of the setting of Tintern and its abbey, as you can see from this slide. The Wireworks are part of a 300-year industrial history in Tintern, centred on the Angiddy Valley. In 1821, a survey by the Duke of Beaufort found that there were 20 water mills in a length of approximately 2 miles, which provided power to forges and wireworks. And at its height, 600 people were employed. Wire was used for cable, which was invented in 1830, knitting needles for the thousands of hand knitters working from their homes, bird cages to satisfy the Victorian fashion for keeping caged birds, buckles, fish hooks, etc. This now is the Wye Valley River. Well, it's more a stream, but it is fast flowing and it produced enough renewable energy to keep those 600 workers employed. In the next slide, we see an engraving from 1807. This illustrates Mr. Thompson's wire mill, and in 1799 Robert Thompson leased the complete complex until 1819, and he was appointed Sheriff of Monmouthshire in 1817, which illustrates the status of important owners of wire-making facilities. He has an imposing tomb in St Mary's churchyard. And there is only one wire mill with 2 water wheels in the 1821 survey. That is the Middle Tongs Mill, or also called the Middle Wire Mill, approximately half a mile from the River Wye. So this probably is Mr. Thompson's mill. And you can see in this picture here that there are coils of wire waiting to be collected. And if you look very carefully, perhaps you can see a horse, no doubt pulling a cart onto which the wire would be loaded and taken down to the waterside. A local historian writing at the time, I.N. Heath, saw a Chaplin vertically boiled locomotive at the lower Wireworks, and we have a record that the Wireworks acquired Chaplin locomotive number 1886 in 1883. The power rating was 9 horsepower. And on the left you see an advertisement for the range of locomotives, which were between 9 and 15 horsepower, and Chaplin built 135 of these between 1860 and 1899. It was locally known as the coffee pot. And on the right hand side is the only surviving restored vertically boiled locomotive in this country at Beamish Museum, also known as a coffee pot. It was supplied by T.H. Head of London in 1871. And in this slide here, we see in the middle Samuel Way outside Beach House where he lived. He worked at the Abbey Tintern Wireworks, which is in fact also known as the Lower Wireworks, now a car park. And on the left, we can see an extract. We can see his indenture from 1844 to Henry Hughes, Esquire, wire manufacturer. The indenture was onerous. It required him not to play at cards or dicks, which was a Victorian word for dice, or dice tables or any other unlawful games, not to haunt taverns or playhouses, and not to commit fornication or even contract marriage. Now on the right is a photograph of Samuel's son Edgar. It was taken in around the 1940s, and Edgar in this picture is with Dolly the horse, ready to haul logs and tree trunks at the sawmills, which at that time had taken possession of the Abbey Mill down near the waterfront. Edgar started work for what was the Template Company, also a Wireworks company, in 1887 when he was 10 years old. This was not long after the 1878 Factories Act that stipulated that no children under 10 should go to work. Charles Dickens was writing about the awful conditions in Victorian England not many years before, and it's now 130 years from then to the present day, when currently we take for granted sanitation, very low levels of infant mortality, and universal education available for all children up to 18. Edgar's job was to walk in front of a coffee pot locomotive with a flag in the daytime or a lamp in the dark to warn people walking along the line. A local person who knew him recalled that it was a dangerous job on the bridge at night, especially as the wooden decking was in poor shape and there was danger of falling into the river. And this brings to an end part 3.